Welcome to the Land Your Bet Sports Betting Show. NFL Week 7 kicks off with Thursday Night Football. I've got best bets and player prop projections for all of these props that we have available to us in this game. Also want to thank you guys for all of the support lately. So we're trying to do another giveaway. Jump in the comments. Let me know who the first touchdown scorer will be for both teams, and you'll be in the raffle to get the $100 right, whomever does get that correct. So jump in there. We've tried to do this for 3 weeks in a row. Still haven't gotten a winner. Gonna look for one today, but let's get into everything I got. Go ahead and give that video a like if it all sounds good. Let's get it. Rolling into the matchups, looking at Denver's offense to kick things off. Not very good in the passing yards game, nor the passing EPA. So the underlying metrics mirror what we're seeing on the field for this Denver squad. In terms of the rush yards, also pretty bad and also pretty identical in terms of the underlying metrics, rush EPA, and the rushing yards overall. O-line metrics kind of match what we're talking about here. 23rd in adjusted yards before contact, and they're 17th, so still bottom half of the league technically in terms of allowing quarterback pressure onto Bo Nix there for the young QB for the Broncos. As for the Saints defense, 29th in passing yards, but 5th in passing expected points added per play. So they're probably somewhere in the middle there. Their passing success rate on defense is 14th. That's probably the most accurate statistic for where they should be considered in terms of their pass defense, middle of the league or so. The rush defense, though, I think is actually as bad as advertised. Only 20th in the amount of rushing yards allowed, but 28th in rushing EPA, and they have the worst adjusted yards before contact for their D-line. So really not much push for their D-line against the opposing offensive line. And they're also dead last in total yards allowed. In the last 5 games, giving up 300 passing yards on average to the opposing QB. They also run the 11th most man coverage, so that's something that we're going to keep in mind here as we look at these player props in a minute. Looking at the Saints offense, 21st in passing yards and passing EPA, pretty accurate assessment of their passing game. Running game's been good, though. They're pretty good there with 13th in terms of the yards, 10th in rush EPA, and their offensive line is getting a pretty good push as well. Middle of the league in adjusted yards before contact. That could be a problem against Denver. I don't think the rushing yards are necessarily going to be there for Kamara in this game, but I do think that their rush game is a better option than their pass game with Spencer Rattler. We'll talk about that a bit more. The other thing, obviously, if you look at Denver's defense, 5th in passing yards, 3rd in pass EPA. They're going to be without Patrick Surtain. He's going to be out for this game officially. So that is something to keep in mind. They're not going to have probably the best cornerback in the league in this game. Still going to have a decent option. Riley Moss is healthy and off the injury report, so he will be playing. But we'll see how Pat Surtain's absence really does affect this pass defense, which has been incredible to date. I also think their run defense is a little bit underrated. 14th in rushing yards, 9th in rush EPA, and they're getting some pretty good push with their defensive line, 5th in adjusted yards before contact. So I think they're still going to have some success getting to the quarterback and at least applying pressure. They're 3rd in pressure rate, and they blitz the 3rd most as well. So they're getting a lot of success off of the plays that they're drawing up to get to the QB. They also play the 2nd most man coverage, even more than the Saints. So something to consider. We always talk about it with man coverage and teams that blitz. Quarterbacks who run, good for rushing yards. Running backs who receive, good for receptions. As we get into Alvin Kamara, quick reminder, if you do want to make sure you get every single bet that I'm placing, you can use the link that's in the description and will be in the pinned comments over on whop.com. And make sure you don't miss the October sale. Oct sale is the code, gets you 50% off if you do want to get into some of these plays that I'm betting every day. Regardless, let's jump into Alvin Kamara and his receiving, because we got to talk about that when it comes to running backs against man coverage teams that blitz. So Denver, 19th in limiting running back receiving yards, but we know that they're 5th best, 3rd best in terms of limiting passing yards overall. So this is one of the outlets, middle of the field stuff, not out wide. That's where you're going to be able to get a little bit more against Denver's defense. In week 6, when we saw him with Spencer Rattler and basically the same offense he's going to run this game because Shaheed and Chris Olave are both out. That's obviously huge as well for anybody getting receiving yards for the Saints team. 8 targets last week, 5 receptions, 24 yards. The thing was, if you look at this, and shout out my guy Brian versus the books for sending me some nice screenshots of the way that Tampa Bay was defending Alvin Kamara, because they bracketed him. They had 2 linebackers on him at all time, and he still managed to get the 5 receptions and 24 yards because Rattler is going to be looking for him because he has a very short ADOT, average depth of target. Rattler only had about 6 yards per target, so guys like Kamara, shorter route guys are going to be the play here if you want to take an over for Saints receivers. The other position to attack against this Broncos team is going to be the tight end spot. We know Olave, Shaheed out, and Shaheed might be out for the season. He might have to go on IR, but Rattler, super low ADOT. Okay, so we know all that. Denver 5th in passing yards, but again, 17th in receiving yards against tight ends, and actually a little bit worse in terms of receptions against tight ends. They're still bottom 10 in the receptions game here. So I prefer the receptions for Juwan Johnson over the yards. Even though he has a pretty good ADOT, I don't know that he's going to be able to get as many downfield targets with a guy like Rattler versus Derek Carr. Also, really in our favor here, 5 of 6 tight ends against Denver caught 4 passes plus. There's some pretty nice numbers out there against them. Only team that failed to have a tight end record 4+ receptions was the Seahawks, and Noah Fant failed to do that. Not the best tight end, obviously, in the world. Juwan Johnson, a bit better, and definitely going to be a much more safe target for a guy like Rattler in this game. So I like him on the receptions. I would prefer the yards for Kamara if you're betting. We have to at least look at who's playing wide receiver for the Saints. Who dat dare that's going to beat them? Cedric Wilson Jr., Bub Means, Mason Tipton, and we should be seeing somebody from the practice squad coming up. Taysom Hill should also be back. Not much of a receiver, but he'll be in there to steal some plays from guys as a runner as well, I imagine. And so with Olave and Shaheed both out, who do we target for the wide receivers if you want a wide receiver on the Saints? Got to be Bub Means. Obviously, his name is awesome in and of itself, but the former Pitt wide receiver was the man last week, big time. I mean, he had 8 targets, most of any receiver, including Shaheed, who we know had to leave that game, but Shaheed had 7, and Bub had 8 last week. 34% of the air yards for this team as well. So we know he's going to be the deep threat without Shaheed, and Shaheed's been the guy that's had the best connection with David Carr this year. We'll see what that means with Spencer Rattler. I think Bub will probably be running slightly shorter routes than if he had David Carr out there and would be going as far as Shaheed does on his go routes. But either way, he's going to be most likely the favorite target for Spencer Rattler as far as the wide receiver core is concerned, and the only guy on the outside. And because we have no Surtain, he's not going to be shadowed by the best corner. Riley Moss will be on him probably a good amount. And that's obviously the worst matchup for the opposing wide receiver, but I still like Bub Means more than I would any other receiver. And he does have a pretty low receiving yards prop at about 31.5 or so. Closing it out with the QB for the Saints, at least for these Saints props. And we've got a few for Denver as well. But I got to be looking at his rushing. This is going to be a popular play. You've got a guy coming in who can use his legs, only his second start, up against man coverage, up against a team that blitzes a lot. It does make sense that he'll be forced out of the pocket, whether he wants to or not, even if they're not calling designed runs for him. Not as likely that things on the outside will be open with the wide receivers being blanketed. So long targets are going to be hard to come by as well, meaning when he does have guys going down the field that are probably covered pretty well, he's probably going to have to take off more than likely. It's only 183 passing yards, so I'm not saying that I would go ahead and fade the passing, but this is a situation where it does scream for a mobile quarterback to get out of the pocket and get rush yards. As we transition to Denver, I do want to remind you guys too, there's a really nice code going on that you can use for parlayplay.io. Really good site to go ahead and find some nice parlays. Also got some free squares that they're giving out pretty much every football Sunday, and for these island games like Thursday Night Football, be able to get something like Bo Nix over a half a yard passing, something to that effect, to have a free square in your play there. But check that out and make sure you use code LandYourBets for $100 on the deposit match there. But go ahead and get into Bo Nix. I think he's going to be a pretty good starting quarterback in the NFL. I don't know if you're with me or not. Would love to know if you are with me and what you guys think about Nix, to be honest, and see where the public sentiment is around him if you feel like commenting about that. But I will say his games that he did not do well in was playing really good defenses, pass defenses. The Jets, second best overall. Seattle was his first game ever in the NFL, and they have the 13th best pass defense in terms of yards allowed and are a very good blitzing defense, in the top 5 in terms of pressure percentage that they get on the QB. So those a little bit of a pass for both those games. Then you look at his 4 overs, including last week versus the Chargers, very good defense. 4 overs, 221 per game in terms of the passing yards. And he's been had his prop line at about under 200 yards in 4 of the last 5 games, and has gone over that in 4 of the last 5 games. So, like I said, only team that was the teams that he didn't go over against were very good. And last week he went over against a very good defense in the Chargers, and probably should have had more than the 220, 216 that he had against them. There was about 40 yards in drop passes from his receivers in this last game. So one of those, and he's up at 236. I think this number should be closer to about 210.5 against this Saints squad, who 29th in passing yards. We mentioned it off the top. 5th in expected points added on the pass, but 14th in success rate. So I don't think they're as good as the EPA, probably not as bad as the amount of yards they're giving up, but 200 is not much to ask for Bo Nix to get in this game. I think this is going to be another good one for him. One of the reasons I like Bo Nix this week is the emergence of Devon Vele, who I think would have emerged much earlier in the season had he not gotten hurt. He had a pretty good week 1, was off to a good start with like 8 targets in that week, got hurt, missed a quarter of that game, and then missed weeks 2 through 5, the next 4 weeks. Came back last week against that very good Chargers defense, plays in the slot, guarded by Derwin James, really, really good DB Pro Bowler, and had a really good game against him. 6 targets, 4 receptions, also had the 78 yards. This is a situation where you've got the slot receiver going up against the Saints, and I just think you have to take that person almost regardless of who it is at this point. I want to pull up the numbers up for the players that have played in the slot going up against the Saints defense and what they've done. Chris Godwin, 11 for 125. Devonta Smith, 7 for 79. Juju Smith-Schuster, 7 for 130. Also on the Chiefs, McCole Hardman, 4 for 33. And Ray McCloud, 6 for 52. Some of those guys going off for yards, all of them getting at least 4 receptions. And I think that receptions are probably the play here for Devon Vele as well. Playing out of the slot against a bad slot defense. And the main nickel corner, slot corner for this team is Alontae Taylor, who's questionable. So even if he is healthy, he's already bad. Now he's banged up. If he's not healthy, I would imagine his backups are not much better than he is right now. So I'm very happy to take the slot receiver here and the emerging Devon Vele. I would love to back a Denver running back in this game and take their over on rushing yards. It just seems like the backups, the running back situation is a bit murky for New Orleans. That's according to Sean Payton last week, who said he'd like to get the youngster Audric Estime more involved into the running game. And now you're talking about Estime and Jaleel McLaughlin stealing touches and snaps from Javonte Williams. He's got a very low number. If this was an RB1, even on a pretty bad team against this Saints run defense rather, I'd love to go over. I just don't know who's going to get the touches. We saw Estime start the second half of last week in their game where they weren't running really at that point anyway, but they do want to see him get rushes. So he might be the guy coming in taking the first and second down carries from Javonte Williams at some point in this game. I just don't know for sure. I do think there will be success on the ground for this team because if you look at the Saints rush defense, talked about it earlier, dead last in adjusted yards before contact, 28th in rush EPA. They have given up they're 20th in giving up rushing yards. So that looks a little bit better, but still nothing to really like write home about, right? So if you do feel like taking a running back and you think you have an edge where you know that Javonte is going to get a few more touches, or we actually get Audric Estime props up because we don't have those yet, I'm with it. I'm not going to tell you to stay away from it, but it's too murky of a situation for me to bet on it. Quick reminder, guys, the Discord's live, the free one as well. We got the free Discord, got the VIP Discord. Links to both are in the description of the video, so make sure you check those out if you do want to get in on the conversation, see some of the stuff we're getting early in these bets and lines that we're finding together. Either way, appreciate the time. We're going to be back with more NFL this weekend, as well as some WNBA stuff for the finals. And don't forget, NBA starts in a week. Let's go. And until I see y'all next, happy betting.